After General Motors announced it was cutting back production in several American plants, U.S. President Donald Trump has threatened retaliation. But what is behind the plan to close these plants in the first place? And as President Trump accuses China of not doing enough to cut the flow of synthetic opioid into the U.S., why is he blaming others rather than doing more to address the issue at home? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. U.S. President Donald Trump threatened on Tuesday to eliminate subsidies for the U.S.'s #1 car maker General Motors after the automaker announced plans to shut down 4 plants in Ohio, Michigan and Maryland. The firm will also cut its production in Canada, South Korea and 2 other locations that were not specified. GM said it plans to reduce its salaried workforce by 15%, including $1/4 of company executives, to save up to $6 billion a year by the end of 2020. True to form, President Trump took to Twitter to express his feelings. Very disappointed with General Motors and their CEO Mary Barra for closing plants in Ohio, Michigan and Maryland, nothing being closed in Mexico and China. Trump had made boosting auto jobs a key priority and has often attacked automakers on Twitter for not doing enough to boost U.S. employment. Among the 4 U.S. factories due for closure is one in Northeast Ohio, a state critical to victory in the 2020 presidential election. So what is driving the decision by General Motors, and what, if anything, can President Trump do about it? Joining me from Palm Beach, Florida via Skype is John Allison, CEO and Chairman of Unio Capital, and here in Beijing, Professor John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Mr. Allison, let me go to you first. First of all, why are these facilities, especially the 4 plants in the 3 states of the United States, being chosen for closure?
Well, I don't think that the location of the 3 plants is really the actual motive behind their closing. If you step back, GM is trying to build the car maker of the 21st century. It is doing a profound repositioning of the company. It's actually a very visionary thing to do, and they're doing it well ahead of when they need to do it. The closure of the those plants is just part of the resource allocation the company must do if it is to become much more electric-oriented, autonomy driving-oriented automobile company and become a leader in that field, as opposed to just being one of, 5 or 20 of them. And so that's really the point. And it happens that certain cars that they want to phase out, sedans, are in those plants. But had those plants been somewhere else, I think they would have closed them somewhere else.
Well, that may well be the investment into the future by the company, but altogether it is said that 14,000 people are expected to be laid off. Some, I guess, will be losing their jobs. Others might be relocated. What will be the significance in terms of the job situation here, Professor John? Professor Gong.
Yeah, well, I think GM is transforming itself. It's moving away from what's called the ICE age, that's the internal combustion engine era, into a more electrified era. So the kind of people they're going to hire, I mean, GM is still hiring people. The kind of people they hire are going to be, more and more located in states like California, in Washington, those states where, the people are building electric engines as opposed powertrains as opposed to this traditional combustion engines. I want to add also another note that the reason that GM is closing these factories, I think basically driven by 2 reasons. One is the cost they're building these factories is not very competitive versus their competitors. These are factories manufacturing compact cars. That's the Chevy Cruze. It has a tough time competing with very entrenched competitors in that market for models like Honda Civic and Toyota Corolla, and also Hyundai Elantra. I mean, these cars are extremely competitive. And also, I think these cars are mostly built in the South, where they don't have those union laws that they be able to manufacture these cars at a much lower cost. So the factory in the Rust Belt states, in Ohio, for example, they have stringent union laws, and the labor costs could be higher. Another reason is, as John just mentioned, that because the electric cars are going to lose in the future. So
yeah. Well, now again, looking at the factor of cost here, we know that President Trump has introduced the steel and aluminum tariff, which is said to have added about $1 billion in terms of cost for the company GE. I remember when President Trump announced these tariffs, Wilbur Ross, his Commerce Secretary, went on TV with a Coke can in his hand saying, look, it's only going to make it slightly, maybe by just a couple of cents. How heavy has the aluminum and steel tariff been for car makers such as GM, Mr. Allison?
Here's how I would put it. It has an impact. There's no question. $1 billion of costs is meaningful. It also has a qualitative impact in the sense that tariffs and the uncertainty of them makes it very difficult for companies like GM and many, many others that we as investors follow to actually plan for their future. So there's the uncertainty factor, there's the cost factor. No question that it has an impact. I would say tariffs in terms of this decision, I'm obviously guessing here, maybe had 20% impact on what they did. The other 80% has to do with the things that I talked about and Professor John talked about, which is ultimately the repositioning of the company.
Okay, President Trump also introduced tax cuts, right, since he came into office, and these measures were supposed to boost manufacturing, bring manufacturing back to the United States. So how much effect has that created in offsetting some of the negative effects that the tariffs might have produced? And it seems that obviously the tax cuts have not helped GE retain these plants. Professor John.
I think it has been quite a while since the tax reduction was announced, and I think the impacts probably already being unfolded. The auto market is very much determined by consumer confidence. And with the stock market a little bit pulling back, and also the prices in the United States increasing across the board, I think American people's pockets are getting an impact, are getting a hit, and inevitably that people are holding back on the big purchases, and also interest rate is rising as well. I mean, many people in the U.S. buy cars on a loan, so as interest rate rises, the demand probably is going to be pushed back. So I think it's all these forces combined together is explaining why GM's compact car product portfolio is facing a lot of challenges, and ultimately they decided to just discontinue these things.
Right. Well, earlier we talked about President Trump's tweet where he said that the U.S. saved General Motors, meaning showing up the company a decade ago when the company filed bankruptcy, and he said that President Trump said that this is the thanks we get, and he also pointed out that how come GM is not closing its plants in Mexico and China? Let's talk a little bit about the China factor. I understand that actually GM sells almost half of its cars in China. For instance, up till September this year, 2.7 million vehicles sold in China, and totally built in GM's company, in GM's factory in China as well. So, Mr. Allison, can GM really afford closing its factories in China, or rather its China business is keeping the company alive?
I think GM is, and particularly the management that I happen to know at GM, are world-class business leaders. These are people who are truly understand where the world is going. They're not just living for next week. China is critical and has been critical to GM's present and future. There's absolutely no way it would be a good thing for GM's China business to go downhill. And the degree to which the president either doesn't understand or simply for political reasons doesn't want to mention that fact it doesn't change the reality. China is going to be in the picture, not just for GM, but for many, many, many companies that you know and that we know or invest in for decades to come.
Yeah, Professor Gong, how do you look at this issue here? And also in this tweet, it's very misleading. It feels as if GM chooses to close its plants in Mexico or China, it could do it.
It doesn't make sense to me at all. I mean, the GM today actually sells more cars in China than in the United States, and my guess is probably even more profitable for its China operation than the United States operation. And China's market is also growing. I mean, it's also growing. And in addition to GM's own brands of cars being sold here, GM also actually holds another indigenous company here in China by the name of Wuling. It's actually doing great. So they're also exporting Wuling cars under the GM brands as well in some developing countries. So I think GM absolutely cannot afford giving up the market in China. I mean, the idea that President Trump talks about, closing factories in China and sort of mentioning that, suggesting that exporting cars from U.S. to China, these cars are usually high-end cars, and the cars being produced in those factories. These are compact models. They just can't compete here in China. The cost is too high. And if you take into account the freight costs and the tariffs and all that, it's just uncompetitive. It's impossible.
So let's also look a little bit at the reasons why President Trump is so bitter about GM losing, especially closing the factories in these particular states. We know Ohio, for instance, or Michigan, a very important base support for President Trump. And Mr. Allison, how much is politics in play here?
The politics is the dominant note. There's very little business intelligence being discussed here. It's all about politics. And the thing is, it's a two-edged sword. On the one hand, you were mentioning the tax cuts earlier. They have been very helpful to corporations across the board in this country, and in part, they've been responsible for increasing the earnings and helping the stock market and so on and so forth. At the same time, these tax cuts have not translated into restoring manufacturing jobs in places like Ohio. And the reason for that is because that idea is an idea of the past. And actually the problem, not just with the Trump administration, but even previous Democratic administrations, is they're spending too little time focusing on where the world is going and the solutions for the future, and trying to bring back the past. It just is not going to come back in that form.
Yeah, very briefly.
That's, yes, politics dominates, absolutely.
Very briefly, before we wrap up, Professor Gong, for these people who will be laid off, however, it is a bad story, a sad future. So what has to be happening to them then?
It's going to be very tough for these people. I mean, you're talking about people in their 40s or 50s. They've been doing, this kind of a job in a GM factory for their entire life. And you ask these people to learn new tricks and go onto the job market for a new job. I mean, I hope the jobs they're going to land is not going to be the Walmart, but it's going to be very tough for these people. I don't know, what the government can do in this aspect, and I guess we'll have to pray for these people and hope the best for these people.
But China also went through a similar period of time, right? And now reform and opening up. We had mass layoffs of people in their mid-50s, 40s with no skill sets for the future, and we had to swallow a lot of that.
That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, we have to leave it there. Many thanks to John Allison, CEO and Chairman of Unio Capital, and John Gong, Professor of Economics at the University of International Business and Economics. You've been watching The Point with me, Liu Xin. When I come back after a short break, President Donald Trump has been pointing an accusing finger at China for supplying the U.S. with what he calls poisonous synthetic heroin, fentanyl. Just how serious is that problem in the U.S., and how much is China to blame? A commission set up by the U.S. Congress accused China for not doing enough to cut the flow of the synthetic opioid fentanyl into the U.S. Earlier this year, U.S. President Donald Trump also pointed the finger at China for the so-called poisonous synthetic heroin, fentanyl, pouring into the country, where overdose deaths due to the substance seem to have become a very serious problem. It seems in response, a Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said on Tuesday that most of the psychoactive substances are designed in labs in Europe and the U.S., and further processing and consumer markets are also mainly in these places, adding saying that although there is no abuse of fentanyl-like substances in China, China has taken active measures to list and control them. So with the sharp rise of overdose deaths in recent years, how serious in reality is the problem in the U.S., and has the U.S. government done enough at home to address the issue? Joining me here in the studio is Wang Hanling, professor at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Professor Wang, thank you very much for joining us. Now, before we go into the specifics, I just want to ask exactly how serious is the death related to the synthetic opioid fentanyl in the United States. Let's take a look at this graphics that's according to data from the U.S. National Center for Health Statistics. We can see that U.S. drug overdose deaths involving both heroin and synthetic opioids are rising sharply in recent years. Overdose of synthetic opioids-led death increased from less than 3,000 in 2012 to nearly 20,000 in 2016, while the number of heroin-led deaths rise from around 6,000 in 2012 to almost 16,000 in 2016. So it seems that there is a sharper rise of opioid-led deaths in the same period of time. What are the factors behind that?
I think the root cause is socio-economic problems, because this the declining of worsening of economic situation led to some social problems. That's the increasing consumption of drugs.
So would you characterize the problem of opioid-related death a serious one?
It's very serious.
It's very serious, okay. Let me go to our guest, Max Wolf, who is chief economist at iCash Group. I have just been told that he's available online and joining us from New York. So, Mr. Wolf, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think has the U.S. government been doing in tackling this synthetic opioid crisis, and has that been enough?
So great to be here. Thank you for having me. Clearly, what we've been doing at the federal, state, and local level is not enough, because last year, 2017, the initial reports are that we had a record 72,000 opioid-related serious health incidents and deaths. So obviously, we have a long way to go here. And I think what we have here is a sort of unfortunate bit of a thing we've done in the United States, where when we've had drug problems, we've tried to blame whoever is in the business of supplying inputs to the drug process, and we've been slow to sort of face the fact that the demand for serious narcotics outside of the medical establishment is a problem in the country that needs to be dealt with, and needs to be dealt with more quickly and more successfully than we've been able to deal with it in the last few years. Those are very, very, very upsetting statistics that you shared with us a few minutes ago.
Well, the U.S. President Donald Trump has indeed blamed China for the problem. In August, he said that it is outrageous that poisonous synthetic heroin fentanyl comes pouring into the U.S. postal system from China. We can and must end this now. So I want to ask Professor Wang here in the studio. By the way, there are other people who are also pointing finger at China for not doing enough. Exactly what is the situation here? So we understand that these substances were designed in labs in the US or Europe. What are they done in China, and why is it making such a loop here?
I think the real problem is that the socio-economic problems in Europe and in the US, and increasing demands for drugs.
Why don't they produce in those places, in the US or in Europe? Why are they being done here? By the way, are they being processed here in China, or have they originated in China?
I think some of them are produced in China,
but why
and
some
other countries.
Yeah, why in China though?
Because China has the advanced factories. They produce everything for the world. Not so only some of this kind of substances, but other products.
Okay. Well, it's okay for China to produce this. Actually, I understand that there are 5 such factories that can produce the substance that's used for these drugs. And but China says, look, for the year 2017, we produced over 24 kilo, but not a gram was smuggled to outside the country. That seems to be different from what we're being accused from the U.S. side.
Yes, I think the U.S. accusation has no proof. There's no hard evidence for that, because the Chinese factories, they make this kind of substance maybe for medical reasons, for some other uses. If some of them have been trafficked to the U.S., maybe there are some other reasons or other trafficking routes, such as from other countries rather than China.
Well, Mr. Wolf, let me go to you. It's not the first time that we hear that these substances are pouring into the U.S. via the postal system. Do we have evidence? I mean, does President Trump have evidence saying that all of this really come from China?
So I would doubt that we have evidence that the fentanyl being abused in the United States has its particular origin generally inside China. I mean, it is pretty clear that we have a fentanyl problem in the U.S., and you know, it might make sense to put it in context too, which is this is something that is a big problem because with our large addict population of opioid addicts, when these people who set out to inject heroin that some dealer has mixed fentanyl into in order to make more profit for himself or herself, they're more likely to fatally overdose than they were before. But again, these are all not the uses for which the substance was made. This is all part of the illicit underground economy and part of the demand for mind-altering narcotics to cope with life difficulties. Yeah. So we're outside of anything that's an official process here by a long distance.
Yeah. Well, Professor Wong, again, it gives people the impression from reading President Trump's tweet or other articles, opinion pieces talking about a similar thing, it gives people the impression that it's not in China's interest to cooperate with the U.S. government to stem this problem. Is it or not?
No, I don't think the U.S. accusation is right.
What has China done? Can China do more? Why is it not so easy for China to totally control?
China has done a lot for the international anti-drug campaign. China participates all the major international conventions on anti-drugs, including the 1961 Single Convention on narcotic drugs, and 1971 Convention on the psychoactive substances, and also the 1988 UN Convention on illicit traffic in drugs and other substances. So we have made great efforts in legislation and law enforcement in international cooperation.
In terms of specific actions taken to tackle the fentanyl problem, China said it has included 25 fentanyl analogs and 2 precursors into its list of controlled substances, and has offered the U.S. over 400 pieces of intelligence regarding the purchase of fentanyl, strengthened the check and seizure of suspicious postal parcels that are sent to the U.S. at key ports, and reinforcing the management and regulation of nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer to tackle the issue. Is there anything else that China can do really to help solve this problem?
I think in order to tackle the drug problem, it needs international cooperation, especially including information sharing. For instance, China provides more than 400 clues of fentanyl-related activities and crimes to the U.S. Last year. And also, just you mentioned, an additional 500 pieces of information relating to the purchase of American consumers of fentanyl substances. So China has made great efforts and cooperates with the U.S. And on the contrary, why the U.S. make accusation against China of not doing enough, but the U.S. has not provided evidence and sufficient information on that. And we hope that the U.S. can do more for that.
Mr. Wolf here, do you think by diverting the attention, diverting the blame on China repeatedly, do you think the U.S. is going to do a better job or achieve better results in its fight against fentanyl?
No, definitely not. Look, part of solving a social problem is admitting its roots and dealing with the problem at the roots. And I think it's pretty self-evident that President Trump has told the American public that he's going to get an advantageous trade deal with China. He's also told the American public that he's going to solve our opium problem in the United States. He made that a bit of a very popular pledge when he was running for president in 2016. And the truth is that he has not delivered on either, and he's found a way to talk about something else that serves those two purposes, but has much more to do with what's politically important to him than it has to do with the realities of the complex issues around drug abuse here in the United States.
Okay, what's going to happen next, Professor Wang? We have about 20 seconds left. What is China going to do in helping the U.S. to resolve this problem? Now that China has the blame, but is China going to do more?
I think in order to tackle the international drug problem, which is a global issue, China has made great efforts, and we hope that the U.S. also can cooperate with China in information sharing and law enforcement cooperation. I think this is the only right solution and the only way to deal with that difficult issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Wang Hanling from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Max Wolf, Chief Economist at iCash Group. And that is all for this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN to watch the show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.